Okay, thanks so much everyone for coming. I know a few of you were expecting to see Marcus hosting the talk. He's sort of had a few passport issues on the way out, so you have me instead. We're here at Hotel Flora in Venice for during the Venice Architecture Biennale as part of our residency at Casa Flora, where we're hosting some screenings of our new documentary, Elevation, which is all about the impact of drones on our cities. But this evening, I'm here with David Chipperfield, and we're going to talk a little bit about Venice and the Biennale and a few other topics. So to start with, I thought we should maybe sort of start by saying, David, maybe you can talk a little bit about your relationship with Venice and, when did you first come here to this city?
Oh my gosh, I came as a student and stayed in a campsite, camping Michelangelo somewhere. Yeah, it was a different Venice experience. But then we've done a few things here. We've been working on the cemetery for a long time, and now we're working on the buildings on the north side of St. Mark's Square.
So let's talk a little bit about the cemetery project, because that's been a couple of decades in the works now. Maybe you could sort of tell us the story of that project.
Depends which story you want to know. The good story or the bad story? Well, it's a good story. But one of the stories is to do with how do you deliver public projects. I don't think I'm being unfair to say there's a second dimension to that, is how do you deliver public projects in Italy, which is a task. There was a whole period after the so-called Mani Puliti, which was an idea of clean hands. It was there were some initiatives in Italy to make a lot of new projects, a lot of competitions, and we managed to win a few of those. The law courts in Salerno, the Ansaldo Museum in Milan, and the Venice law courts. They were great competitions, and it was a fantastic period for us, working in England, where we had very few opportunities to think about bigger projects. So for us, the competitions were important. And I think competitions are important. I still think that for emerging practices, a good competition system is important. On the other hand, of course, it's important that winning projects of competitions get built. It's not always the case. In the case of Venice, the cemetery, San Michele, we are slowly building it. There's another phase completing now. So slowly and I think it's a good testament to the concept that the concept is robust enough to handle this rather extended process.
I mean, you talk about the challenges of designing and building in Italy. I mean, it must add another dimension when you're working in Venice, like on the lagoon. Were there any sort of challenges that threw up that you had to deal with on that project?
Well, you can see, that the citizens of this city are faced with and have to deal with as part of their daily life this rather extraordinary thing that all the streets are full of water, and that does make things difficult. But I think it's worth saying that while I would I would criticize the public system to some degree in Italy, but I would criticize it in a lot of places. I would also want to make sure that criticisms are balanced with another dimension of Italy. One has to say that despite everything, Italy is still the home of architecture. That's why we're all here. We opened an exhibition in Vicenza 2 weeks ago, and there were 500 people, that just normal citizens, that came and listened to a sort of introductory opening speeches. The people here are, you know, very passionate about architecture. They're passionate about design, and not just from a sort of superficial point of view. I think, you know, this great history of architecture in this country doesn't disappear, even though at this moment in time it's probably not producing to its capacity. It's you know, it's hitting lower than it should do. But I would still, I think we still have to respect the fact that why is the Biennale here? Why are Italian publications so important? Why is design so important? And I think this is an embedded attitude, not just a professional attitude, but a cultural attitude. And I think that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of in our tendency to, you know, be critical of administration's inability to complete projects.
And when we're sort of talking about this kind of incredible legacy of architecture in Italy, it probably seems fitting to then talk a little bit also about the other project you have in Venice, which is a restoration or renovation on San Marco. I was sort of reading a little bit about that project earlier and didn't realize quite how old that building is. It's sort of from the 12th century, right? And I just kind of was, I guess I was really interested in how you even begin to deal with, you know, changing a building with so much history. Well,
the present, you know, the traces of the original building are from then, but the building that we see now is from the 16th century. So, yeah, I mean, again, the extraordinary thing in Italy is the presence of history and the idea that one has to marry progress and conservation as part of the same story. I think it's something that you know, we have to take on board more in other cities. I mean, we are now in a moment when there's a lot of investment in major cities, and some of that investment puts unnecessary pressure or unfair pressure on knocking down buildings. Clearly, we don't knock buildings down from the 16th century or the 15th century. We don't knock them down also from the 18th century. But we do knock down buildings which contribute to the layers of the city. If you think of the city as being a sort of probably the most interesting, you know, nearly geological and cultural evidence of growth organically. The tragedy is, of course, if we want to build something new, we have to knock something down. If you are collecting paintings, you can buy a new painting. You don't have to necessarily burn one in your collection. You just put it in storage. So we have this problem in architecture that we are in progressing in cities. We also have to make judgments, and our judgments about what we keep, how we keep them, how we protect. At the same time as how we develop, I think is something that puts cities in a certain crisis, because we expect something from cities more than just convenience. And architecture at its best, and cities at their best, are organic. They represent our, you know, our attempts to create what we might call a civilization, probably better than any of the other arts. And I think this is something that we in our contemporary moment we're struggling to deal with.
Let's talk a little bit now about the Biennale, which obviously is going on this week. So you were here 6 years ago? 2012, curating. I mean, sort of looking back at that now, do you feel that you achieved what you wanted to at the time? And, you know, like looking back on it, sorry, articulate that a little bit better. What did you want to achieve with that? And do you feel that you did, looking back now?
100%. No, it's. I wanted a little bit along the conversation we've just had. I was concerned that the profession of architecture had grown in a certain way, and that the Biennale had become a sort of showroom where architects were invited, and you tried to show your best project, and you tried to compete with others. And in that sense, I felt that it was tending to emphasize the competitive nature and the tendency that contemporary architecture has to become sort of autonomous. It's very much now identified with the author, let's say. Modern architecture, you know, that's a Zaha Hadid building, this is a Herzog Demeron building, this is a Rento piano building. Now, of course, that's always been the case to some degree, but it's tending to dominate the architectural debate. So I was interested in the Biennale being not about what separated us in a way, or what distinguished one architect against another. But the opposite is, why couldn't we, leave our guns at the door, as it were, and talk about what we shared? Because all architects in the end, if they sit in the bar late at night, they end up talking about similar concerns and issues, both within the practice and in terms of intellectual concerns and practical concerns. So I just thought the Biennale could be an opportunity for us to not make a showroom where architects could show how good they were compared to others, but that we, as a profession, might show how useful we were. Because I think the common ground that I was talking about was the common ground that linked professionals together, but also linked us to society, because we only work through society. I cannot finish the cemetery on my own. I mean, as much as I would like to, it's not up to me. Yeah. So I'm not an artist. I can't go home and just work longer. So we are at the mercy, and we serve, and we are intimate with, and we are part of society. That's why when it works, it's strong. It's in a way, good architecture is a much more powerful cultural measure than a good painting. Francis Bacon can make an amazing painting, but he can live a strange life, and he can be rude to everybody. And we adopt this as culturally important, and it does represent something. I mean, clearly it does. But architecture represents something much more collective. And without that relationship, we can't conceive it. We can't realize it. So the idea of my Biennale was to emphasize the need for much more understanding of our collective potentiality, and much more in terms of the relationship we have to society. And I think secondly, I think I was interested that the Architecture Biennale should have a distinct theme by which all projects were registered. That we had been invited into Biennale before, and you just get this request, would you like to put something in? And you just try to work out what you should put. You don't have an idea. So I think it's quite useful, and I think it's been useful in the last three Biennale. I mean, to some degree, I would like to take the credit for that. Since my Biennale, I think that the theme has been more precise. And I think this theme, which I think is sharing very, very similar concerns that I had, I think emphasizing other things, is similarly a demanding theme. It demands people to step up to that idea.
And do you think exhibitions like the Biennale really do have the power to change people's views on architecture and its sort of its influence and its role in society?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, architecture exhibitions are not easy anyway. I mean, one would have to say all architecture exhibitions have a sort of quite a heavy dose of failure embedded in them, because it's always difficult. Because we don't, it's not like putting an exhibition of paintings or sculpture. I mean, those artists and sculptors make things for display. We don't. We might make things which can be displayed. And we can organize material into a sort of didactic structure, or we can. But the subject in the end is really architecture, which is only really the exhibit is of the architecture itself. That's not to say drawings aren't interesting, models aren't interesting, films, So I think all that you can do is to focus an agenda. I think that's why it's important that there is a theme. And I think this theme this year is important, the idea of what can architecture give back, beyond the practical and the functional. What gestures can architecture make that have a social and public component? And I think that's a very important thing to say. Whether that theme is communicated on every project, whether it's always convincing, I'm not sure, but I think it's important in a way to shine the light on that topic. And I think secondly, I would say in terms of the Biennale, whatever happens, the celebration of architecture at this moment in a city which is so imbued with architecture, you don't have to go to the Biennale in a way. I mean, the architecture is around us. I mean, that's what's so extraordinary about this part of Italy. In a way, we can't even compete. But to have a sort of confluence of the profession, to have this celebration of architecture in a city and a culture that is so, is so rich in architecture, in architectural evidence, not in words, but in facts. I think that in itself is always a very important thing to happen. And I think it's amazing that it happens. And having worked with the Biennale, I would say any notion of this idea that Italians are inefficient is completely denied by the extraordinary logistics of the Biennale. I mean, it is handled unbelievably well, and I've seen it from the inside. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. Every 2 years for architecture, every 2 years for art. That's an amazing achievement of the Venice Biennale to celebrate art and architecture every 2 years. I think that's beyond the subject, beyond the precise agenda. I think it's an amazing event.
It is interesting. So I spoke with Shelley and Yvonne, who are curating this year's show, yesterday, and they were sort of talking about this idea, sort of like you mentioned, they really wanted this year's event to be about showing that architects are not object makers, they are space makers, and they're giving gifts to the public, and trying to work out how you articulate that in an exhibition really is an incredible challenge, to be able to sort of work out how you make the intangible tangible to an audience. But probably this is a good point to talk a little bit about your exhibition in Vicenza, which opened last week. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to sort of try to exhibit architecture there and the challenges of that?
Well, we were invited to put an exhibition on in the Basilica Palladiana, which is a wonderful but intimidating space. Vicenza, you know, if Venice is the home of architecture, I think Vicenza equally, and of course it's the home of Palladio. So it was an enticing invitation. We're always nervous about showing our work in exhibition format. It is very difficult. But what we tried to do was to show current projects or projects which have just been finished or in the process of being finished, so that the teams who are responsible for the projects could, in a way, volunteer how they would like to show the projects. I wanted to avoid a sort of archival exhibition or a sort of a retrospective work. I wanted to make it, in a way, a little biennale exhibition of our own studio, and try to convey the diversity of responsibilities and approaches and ideas that are sort of embedded in an architectural practice.
How would you kind of, how would you describe the values that drive your architectural practice and your projects?
That's a big question.
No, just in a nutshell.
Well, I think that there's a number of diverse concerns that an architect has, and all architects have. We are motivated and excited by making physical things. This is the gift that we're allowed. We can make spaces. We can make we can build walls. We can make holes in those walls called windows. We can let light through those windows. We can make a beautiful floor. We can make a ceiling. We can manipulate space, and we can organize that space into a series of spaces, and we can materialize that. So the potential is there to do something powerful with stuff. Potential is there. We can't always do it, because there are times when we struggle to realize that potential. However, that's what I would say. As architects, that's the oxygen of our work. I mean, we get excited about that, the tangible, the physical. On the other hand, that exercise is only relevant, or it's made valid, by what it's for. So its purpose, and of course we want that purpose to be useful. We want it to have. We're interested in the physical, and we're interested in that having a societal importance. Just making a nice staircase and a nice room is not enough if it doesn't, do anything. So we straddle those concerns, and I think it's important to try to, as a practice, to demonstrate our engagement professionally in terms of those skills, how we make things, and we should be able to invest the physical with quality. But at the same time, as a practice, we want to be engaged in projects, and we want those projects to have some meaning within a sort of larger societal perspective, whether those are cultural buildings or whether they are commercial buildings.
Do you think enough architects today engage with societal, look at societal issues, or sort of working for the public good?
I think all architects want to. That's what we've been trained to do. We believe, that we get up in the morning, and what we do is not just a business. I like to believe that, and I think it's on the whole true. it's not easy to fulfill that ambition. It's not easy to be put in that position. There are, I think all architects are interested in housing. I mean, we're interested in housing. In England, we have an enormous housing problem, but it's incredibly ignored part of patronage. I mean, the government's not interested in building, so it's a market thing, and the market is not interested in doing it in any way that isn't totally commercial. So something that we might believe is important as architects is not necessarily penetrable. I think the good story, certainly in England, I would say, is a younger generation is really frustrated by that and is really trying very hard, even at the small scale, to get involved. I think the problem is that they are small scale things, and there's no political support. But so I would say, are all architects working for the good of society? No, of course not. And some, I would say, are working maybe in the other direction. But I would say all architects would like to.
You've spoken quite often in the past about Brexit and how you feel that it's going to be a dreadful thing. I don't want to sort of bring up all those issues again now, but do you think possibly possibly one of the good things that has come about is sort of this reaction from UK-based architects to sort of try to change things based on sort of being faced with a situation that many of them didn't want? Do you think part of that kind of great energy in the UK is coming from, I guess, a reaction against a political situation that was unwanted?
I haven't seen any real reaction from the profession, which I find very disappointing, because I think we could have spoken up much more strongly. And we do have a professional body which could have represented that. Or we have a Chamber of Architects that could make stronger political representation about that. Not to say we shouldn't do it, but in a way to challenge the government in their promises. It's nonsense to say that we're not going to trade so much with Europe, but let's trade with China and Russia and India and all other places. I mean, tell us how. I mean, I've tried to work in India. We work in China. It's no substitute. So, this idea that the government is very excited about the creative industries having new opportunities in Argentina, wherever Boris Johnson is at the moment, he's in South America, extolling this. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not happening. It won't happen for us. It's not viable for architects to get on a plane or advertising agencies or other people to the so-called service and cultural industries. And you're not going to go to Argentina. It's not viable. So why we haven't asked them, tested them more, and challenged them more, I have no idea. I think I would say that if you say that there has been more concern, I think there certainly has been, and certainly the conversation about what it is to have a relationship with Europe has been better articulated after we voted to leave than it was before. And the young generation, who is going to suffer from this more than the rest, us oldies, has suddenly found their voice and realized that this is going to be a disaster for them. And we know that demographically, if you took a vote amongst young people, we would never have. It was basically old people that took us out of Europe. Ian McEwan famously said, we just have to wait 1 year because there will be 1 million old people will have died and 1 million young people will have got the vote. And that's all it takes to swing the referendum. I'm still hoping, against hope, that the the government is so incompetent, and luckily we have probably the most impressive bunch of hopeless politicians we've ever assembled, that they will be unable to deliver it. And they are demonstrating that it's very, very difficult. And as it becomes more and more difficult, I think more and more people are becoming more aware of what that apparently innocent decision was about. And I think, look, it's not going to stop us coming to Venice. It's not going to stop us but it's going to make everything difficult. We are no longer getting the same applications from European nationals into our office as we were before. The ability to teach in European universities will change. Already, European competitions are pointing out that if Brexit goes ahead next year, British architects won't be allowed to participate. So it's a reality. It is a slow. I say, is it a business crisis? I mean, for our office, not. We have an office in Berlin, we have an office in Milan, and it makes no difference to us commercially. And I think people will find ways around it commercially, but that's not the question. The question is not commercial, it's cultural. And we know that making things smaller is not what we need to do at this moment in history. We have to see the larger consequence of things. If you just think about sustainable issues of air quality, of water quality, of energy, these are not things that respect borders. We have a foundation in the north of Spain, and we're doing a lot of work on sustainable issues, and we're trying to promote the idea that conventional political, administrative borders have no value anymore when you come to issues of sustainability. A forest fire does not stop in one borough or another. Traffic does not respect one mayoral authority compared to another. Polluted water does not. So actually, from the point of view of sustainable issues, you have to go way back. You have to start looking at regions in a very different way than we used to administer. We've used to that. So the idea that we are doing the opposite, we're starting to say, well, we'll keep our beaches clean. We don't need Europe to tell us how to keep our beaches clean. We'll deal with issues of sustainability. We'll deal with issues of food production, etc., etc. I think is mad. You shouldn't have asked me that, should you?
Perhaps it's a good opportunity to see if we have any questions from the audience. Do we have any?
Let's have fun.
Anyone? Perhaps not.
No one from my office.
Well, if we don't have any questions, maybe it's sort of time to just say, what are you hoping to see at the Biennale this year? What are your sort of the things that you're looking out for and hope will be part of the exhibition?
Oh, I just went there very briefly to the main pavilion. I already saw, very, very nice installations. I expect to see a lot of architecture and good architecture, but also reflection on architecture. Not just people promoting their projects, but I think what this Biennale does and what the Biennale has become more is that it has a quality of reflection as opposed to just the idea of promotion.
Thank you very much, David. And
thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. It's been really lovely to be here in the garden of Hotel Flora. Thank you so much for having us.